Again, a lengthening moment of silence before the Phoana replied. "We cannot tell. We only know that there is a force laid up here, set behind certain gates in the far past, upon which we may call for some supreme effort. But this much we also know. The evil of the shadow reaches out from here now, and where that darkness falls, men will no longer be men, but things in the guise of men who obey and follow as mindless creatures. As yet this shadow of the shadow is a small one, but it will spread, for that is the nature of those who have spawned it. They have chanced upon it and corrupted a thing we know, since power feeds upon the will to power. Having turned it to their bidding, they will not be able to resist using it, for it is so easy to do, and results exhaust the nature of those who employ it. You have said that you and those like you who travel the time trails fear to change the past. Here the first steps have been taken to alter the future. But unless we complete the defense, it will be ill for all of us." "And this is your only weapon?" Ash asked once more. "The only one strong enough to stand against that which is now unleashed." In the pavement the fire lines were bright and glowing. Even when Ross shut his eyes, parts of those designs were still visible against his eyelids. "We don't know how." He made a last feeble protest on the side of prudence. "We couldn't move as you did." "Apart, no. Together, yes." The silvery figures were once more swaying, the mist which was their hair flowing about them. Carwall's hands went out, and the slender fingers of one of the Phoana lifted, closed about firm, brown, Terran flesh. Ash was doing the same. Ross thought he cried out, but he could not be sure. As he watched Carwall's head begin to sway in concert with her Phoana partner, her black hair springing out from her shoulders to rival the rippling strands of the aliens. Ash was consciously matching steps with the companion who also drew him along a flowing line of fire. In this last instant, Ross realized the time for retreat was past. There was no place left to go. His hands went out, though he had to force that invitation because in him there was a shrinking horror of this surrender. But he could not let the others go without him. The Phoana's touch was cool, and yet it seemed that flesh met his flesh. Fingers as normal as his met fingers in that grasp. And when that hold was complete, he gave a small gasp. For his horror was wiped away. He knew in its place a burst of energy, which could be disciplined to use as a weapon or a tool in concentrated and complicated action. His feet so, and then so. Did those directions flow without words from the Phoana's fingers to his, and then along his nerves to his brain? He only knew which was the proper next step, and the next, as they wove their way along the patterned lines, with their going adding a necessary thread to a design. Forward 4 steps, backward 1, in and out. Did Ross actually hear that sweet thrumming, akin to the lilting speech of the Phoana, or was it a throbbing in his blood? In and out. What had become of the others he did not know. He was aware only of his own path, of the hand in his, of the silvery shape at his side to whom he was now tied as if one of the rover capture nets enclosed them both. The fiery lines under his feet were smoking, tendrils rising and twisting as the hair of the Phoana rippled and twisted. And the smoke clung, wreathed his body. They moved in a cocoon of smoke, thicker and thicker, until Ross could not even see the Phoana who accompanied him, was only assured of her presence by the hand which grasped his. And a small part of him clung desperately to the awareness of that clasp as an anchorage against what might come, a tie between the world of reality and the place into which he was passing. How did one find words to describe this? Ross wondered, with that part of him which remained stubbornly Ross Murdoch, Terran time agent. He thought he did not see with his eyes, hear with his ears, but used other senses his own kind did not recognize or acknowledge. Space, not a room. A cave anything, made by normal nature. Space which held something. Pure energy? His Terran mind strove to give name to that which was nameless. Perhaps it was that spark of memory and consciousness which gave him that instant of seeing. Was it a throne? And on it a simmering figure? He was regarded intently, measured, and set aside. There were questions, or a question he could not hear, and perhaps an answer he would never be able to understand. Or had any of this happened at all? Ross crouched on a cold floor, his head hanging, drained of energy, of all that feeling of power and well-being he had had when they had begun their dance across the symbols. About him, those designs still glowed dully. When he looked at them too intently, his head ached. He could almost understand, but the struggle was so exhausting he winced at the effort. Gordon? There was no clasp on his hand. He was alone. Alone between two glowing Arabskus. That loneliness struck at him with the sharpness of a blow. His head came up frantically. He stared about him in search of his companions. Gordon! His plea and demand in one was answered. Ross? On his hands and knees, Ross used the rags of his strength to crawl in that direction, stopping now and then to shade his eyes with his hands, to peer through the cracks between his fingers for some sight of Ash. There he was, sitting quietly, his head up as if he were listening or striving to listen. His cheeks were sunken. He had the drained, worn look of a man strained to the limit of physical energy. Yet there was a quiet peace in his face. Ross crawled on, put out a hand to Ash's arm, as if only by touching the other could he be sure he was not an illusion. And Ash's fingers came up to cover the younger man's in a grasp as tight as a Foana's hold had been. We did it. Together we did it, Ash said. But where? Why? These questions were not aimed at him, Ross knew, but at the moment the younger man did not care where they had been, what they had done. It was enough that his terrible loneliness was gone, that Ash was here. Still keeping his hold on Ross, Ash turned his head and called into the wilderness of the symbol glowing space about them. Karawa! She came to them, not crawling, not wrung almost dry of spirit and strength, but on her 2 feet. About her shoulders her dark hair waved and spun. Or was it dark now? Along those strands there seemed to be threaded motes of light, giving a silvery sheen which was a faint echo of the Foana's tresses. And was it only his bemused and bewildered sight? Ross mused, or was her skin fairer? Karawa smiled down at them and held out her hands, offering one to each. When they took them, Ross knew again that surge of energy he had felt when he had followed the Foana into the maze dance. Come, there is much to do. He could not be mistaken. Her voice held the singing lilt of the Foana. Somehow she had crossed some barrier to become a paler, perhaps a lesser, but still a copy of the 3 aliens. Was this what they had meant when they warned of a change which might come to those who followed them into the ritual of this place? Ross looked after the girl to Ash with searching intensity. No, he could not see no outward change in Gordon, and he felt none within himself. Come! Some of Karawa's old impetuousness returned as she tugged at them, urging them to their feet and drawing them with her. She appeared to know where they must go, and both men followed her guidance. Once more they came out of the weird and alien into the normal, for here were the rock walls of a passage running up at an angle, which became so steep they were forced to pull along by handholds hollowed in the walls. Where are we going? Ash asked. To Cleanse. Karawa's answer